Hey, peace and blessings, everybody. It's your brother Sorry back with yet another one. As always, peace to the ancestors. You know what I mean? All the ones who came before us, all the shoulders that we stand on. Peace to the our spiritual support. You know what I mean? Peace to the ancestors. Peace to the true and living. Uh, if you've been watching this, tuning in into this subject matter that we've been kind of kicking around. You know what I mean? Over the last several years and some change. You know what I mean? Um, you must be true and living. Nice to make your acquaintance. Today we got an interesting piece, as always. You know what I mean? We're gonna go back into this bioetheric feedback loop. Gonna get back into that. Get back into the bioetheric feedback loop. Today we're gonna talk about divination systems. Now I know we kind of touched on this on previous videos as far as divination systems and everything like that. From your tarot cards to your rune stones, casting lights, um, all that astrology, all that stuff like that, or whatever case may be. Now, just to kind of, I don't know, preface this, we've been talking about the bioetheric feedback loop. If you're not familiar with what that is, go back to the previous videos. We've been kind of dealing with that this whole time, whatever case may be. It's a framework. We're dealing with the idea that the soul is an electrical phenomenon, not taking nothing away from it as a spiritual phenomenon, but we're dealing with it as if it's an electrical phenomenon, so we can kind of get a few more receipts and stuff like that and get closer to something that's measurable. Now, what we've been talking about the third nervous system, the DC analog nervous system that Robert Becker kind of discovered and everything like that. It deals with cellular regeneration and the communication between cells, similar to how what Dr. Sebi talks about, how about the interstitial fluid and alkaline and acidity. Jerry Tennant, he talks about acidity and alkaline deals with the voltage of the cell, high or low voltage. So we made all that correlation, and we're filtering all this through Nikola Tesla's physics. The relevance in using Tesla's physics, as we see, um, I put it to you like this: when we go into, let's say, like Einstein's physics, things like we got videos about radionics and psychotronics and things of that nature, right? When you get into things like radionics and psychotronics, they don't gel well with Einstein's physics. You see what I'm saying? It's more particle based. It's those things come across as being pseudo because Einstein had something that he called spooky action at a distance. So whenever something traveled faster than the speed of light, or whenever you would have instantaneous action at a distance, or what have you, anything that traveled faster than the light, than the speed of light, he could not explain it in his physics or whatever, and he wrote it off as spooky action at a distance. Thus, we have in the modern era, we have a lot of people when you mention certain things, certain qualities or categories of phenomena or whatever, it's wrote off as pseudo because most people are operating off Einstein's physics. However, when we flip to Nikola Tesla's physics, you get into more field-based, ether-based physics or whatever that are more compatible with what we see in Vedic metaphysics, because Tesla was influenced by the physics of Swami Vivekananda. So that's my little backtrack. Without any further ado, yeah, man, we're gonna get into this. So the energetic mirror, right? And we do have a the bioetheric reflection principle. Um, got a video on that. It should premiere before this one is out, so y'all get a taste of that. But the energetic mirror, a bioetheric and archetypal framework for understanding divination mechanisms. Now, when we say the bioetheric feedback loop, we're talking about a feedback loop from what was called the soul or the blueprint to the flesh and blood physical organism. So it's everything you do and think that it generates some sort of communication to the blueprint, and the blueprint communicates back to us. But the blueprint does not communicate to us in the sense of human language as we understand the blueprint communicates with us in more abstractions, thematic type ways, or whatever case may be, kind of like how we were talking about with the meaning exercise with the experiential, where we would take several different situations and we would isolate the theme in those various situations, and we would solve the imbalance within the theme, thus correcting a plethora of seemingly unrelated events. So Carl Jung talks about acausal connections. So that's kind of like the bibliography, research ready aspect of it. The energetic mirror. Okay, so establishing the theoretical nexus, the bioetheric feedback loop. The analysis of divination necessitates a comprehensive framework that integrates psychological mechanisms, subtle energy dynamics, and physiological patterning. The proposed bioetheric feedback loop model provides this synthesis, positing that human consciousness and life experience are recorded within a non-classical informational field that continuously interacts with the environment via a fundamental mechanism known as the reflection principle. So basically, the blueprint interacts with your environment. Let's see here. The biophysical foundation, Becker's direct current system, the bioelectromagnetism. Bioelectromagnetism is a field all to itself. The material substrate for the bioetheric feedback loop rests upon the biological mechanisms invested by Robert Becker. We talk about that. Let's see here. DC system. This recognition of the body as inherently electrical phenomena is critical for understanding divination. The recognition of the body as inherently electrical phenomena is critical for understanding divination. So again, if we're using Einstein's physics, we're not going to understand divination. It's going to come across as pseudo, right? Okay. The recognition of the body as inherently electrical phenomena is critical for understanding divination. The DC system provides the foundational conductive substrate for the subtle energy fields discussed in the bioetheric feedback loop model. Remember this DC system that Becker is talking about, the third nervous system that the cells use to communicate, or whatever case may be. This is directly tied into subtle forms of energy, or when they talk about the subtle body and esoteric tradition, this is heavily tied into that. Okay, so this is the link between the physical and the so-called metaphysical. It establishes a physical, albeit non-classical network capable of transmitting complex, nonlinear analog information. All right, it's a system that transmits analog information. Given that divination systems, such as symbolic imagery of the tarot or the patterned lines of the I Ching, are inherently analog systems. It's an analog. This is an analog nervous system. This third nervous system we're talking about, and it's and some of the divination systems that are created are inherently analog systems that communicate meaning, pattern, and quality rather than simply binary data. Meaning, pattern, and quality, sort of like a theme, sort of more on the thematic side, okay, rather than simple binary data. The analog nature of Becker's DCS suggests that it acts as the primary field processor for consciousness and subtle information transfer. All right, so this nervous system that the cells use to communicate, it acts as the primary field processor for consciousness and subtle information transfer. So the bioetheric field as the informational template, building upon the DCS, the or the direct current system of Robert Becker, the bioetheric field represents the externalized or the human biofield, as Eileen Day McCusick will call it, or it's in medical terminology right now. I think the NIH recognizes that as a medical term. Okay, the human biofield or the bioetheric field represents the externalized, measurable component of the internal physiological and psychological and physiological state. Researchers using techniques such as Kirkland photography, okay, we talked about that. Bioetheric field is not merely a passive energy sheet. It actively records psychological and physical disorder. I think we talked about that in Eileen Day McCusick's work. it's the ether ties into the what's called the Akashic records, because ether and Akasha are interchangeable. So the information stored in the human unconscious is a portion of the information that's in the so-called Akashic records, right? So studies involving these photographic techniques have documented specific disturbances correlating with internal imbalances. Okay, so boom, 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 we talked about that. Okay, the karmic blueprint and energetic predetermination. The informational content carried within the bioetheric field is defined within the framework as the karmic blueprint. The blueprint is described as an energy pattern comprising imprints and information gathered from prior experiences which serve to inform the physical body at the time of incarnation, right? So it's just like that. Like how we talked about that liver cell turning into a stem cell, and then something informing it of its new assignment as a lung cell or something like that, hypothetically. This pattern is connected to a larger universal energy information field, linking the individual subtle energies to the cosmic continuum, right? So the individual is a part of the larger continuum. Please bear with me. We are going to get to the punchline when we start getting into divination. This is just seasoning the pot. Okay, the existence of a pre-existing karmic blueprint introduces the complex issue of energetic predetermination versus free will. Now, when we get into this or whatever case may be, that's a conversation on free will versus determinism. My perspective on free will versus determinism, my personal perspective from what I understand, is that there is a such thing as free will, but free will is jaded because all of us people are like snowflakes, and everybody has strengths and weaknesses, things they like, things that they don't like. So a person's free will may be jaded or influenced by certain acausal factors and everything like that, right? Certain let's say like um I don't know, I like, let's say I like ice cream, this person don't like ice cream, you see what I'm saying? um then where we go to, I might want to go to, on a hypothetical, Dairy Queen for lunch or something like that. This person might not want to go to Dairy Queen because they don't like ice cream or whatever case may be. So it might be other factors, but that contribute to what we choose as far as our free will and stuff like that, certain acausal factors. A topic that intersects philosophy and neuroscience. While research into neurological readiness potential debates the extent of conscious control over voluntary actions, the bioetheric feedback loop model provides a framework wherein the informational pattern, karma, structures the underlying system, right? This, and go back into the whole thing. According to what we're talking about in this model, karma is a feedback from the blueprint to the physical organism. It's a feedback loop. It ain't God trying to punish you or nothing but like that. It's a consistent feedback loop. And the things that you do affect the blueprint. You see what I'm saying? Go back to the video we got about the consequences of not honoring self, getting fired. This blueprint does not necessarily dictate fixed fate. This blueprint does not necessarily dictate fixed fate, but rather sets the constraints and high probability trajectory for individuals' consciousness, influencing the background neuronal noise and establishing the inherent repertoire of general capacities available. It limits the choices that you potentially have available, like how we talked about as far as astrology is concerned or whatever. The placements as far as astrology are concerned, that's they're arrived at the moment of the person takes their first breath, right? So before you encounter any of the people or the majority of the people that you will encounter in life, and most of the situations that add to your trauma or whatever case may be, your placements that predisposed you to certain things or whatever in a certain direction, maybe not completely affected your free will or whatever case may be 100%, but let's say, like, I don't know, maybe 45, maybe 60% or something like that, something along those lines or whatever kind of swayed you in a particular direction with certain affinities or whatever case may be. So yeah, And this is from the moment of your birth, certain acausal factors or what have you. So consequently, divination systems are mechanisms designed not to predict a fixed future, but to access and decode this informational blueprint. So they're just trying to decode the informational blueprint, and it's the most likely outcome because it's the trajectory that the energy is going on. It's the momentum that the energy is going on. More than likely, your free will is gonna be in line in some iteration with the momentum of the energy at large, thereby forecasting the outcome only if the individual continues to operate exclusively within the constraints of the currently active pattern, right? The reading thus empowers the individual by revealing the existing energetic limitations. So it just reveals the limitations that the person has to work with or whatever case may be. You see what I'm saying? Um, when you do readings for people, you run across all kind of interesting life situations. A lot of times they're outside of what you may experience as an individual. Maybe somebody wired differently than you, and just in viewing their life and the situations they go through. A lot of times it's often quite interesting. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Um, Defining the bioetheric feedback loop and reflection principle. The bioetheric feedback loop describes a continuous dynamic interaction between the internal psychological state, its externalized energetic field, and the subsequent environmental reaction. It is the continuous loop where the internal psychological state, governed by the karmic blueprint, feeds analog information into the bioetheric field via, or the human biofield as it's called in medical science today, via DC currents, and the environment provides energetic and informational feedback. The environment, like we said on numerous other videos, provides energetic and informational feedback. You see what I'm saying? Remember, I got a video, Thinking with Your Environment. We got a video months and months and months ago, often via synchronicity that influences the blueprint itself, right? Okay, the reflection principle is a critical mechanism within the loop that enables divination, right? The reflection principle is what enables divination, according to this, right? This principle states that the internal informational template, the individual's current state, their unresolved conflicts, and their karmatic blueprint is dynamically externalized. Their karmatic blueprint is dynamically externalized. Remember how we talked about, go back to previous videos. We have videos talking about the language of situations and everything like that. We talked about how the self communicates, or the higher levels of the self, talking about this feedback loop, communicates through situations, circumstances, and patterns in a person's life, or whatever case may be. So their karmic blueprint is dynamically externalized, projected, or mirrored onto the immediate environment, right? And we said that the external field is resonant in nature, it mirrors things. Divination tools, divination tools, when activated, capture this reflection, right? Divination tools, when activated, capture this reflection. This essential process asserts that the external world functions as an energetic mirror. So if your car break down, it means something. The specific thing that's wrong with your car, it has something to do with what something that's going on in your life. Everything down to the smallest thing, it has some sort of message in it, or whatever the case may be. There is just a barrier between our ability to decode it and everything like that. Like I said, God never shuts up, and God has infinite patience for our lack of understanding. You see what I'm saying? Okay, the specific disorder or turbulence detected in the subtle energy field must be meaningfully reflected by the resulting symbolic patterns drawn or cast in the reading, right? Let's see, the foundational components of theoretical nexus are summarized in the table. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so bioetheric feedback, bioetheric field. Description and source: the measurable informational energy field, DC current, aura, chakra patterns linked to physical and psychological states. Role in divination: carries the informational pattern, blueprint of the query to be read. So when you're reading somebody, when in previous videos we likened, we used the example of astrology. In astrology, there's a transiting um, um, there's a transiting chart, and then you have a natal chart. Your natal chart is indicative of your field, or basically the cards that you were dealt at birth or whatever case may be. It's your field, what you got to work with as far as um at the moment you took your first breath, the placements and the alignments of the planets at that particular time. The transiting chart would be what's going on now, up to the minute, now. So let's see here. Your biofield carries the informational pattern of the query to be read. So when a person does a tarot card reading, an astrology reading on you, rune stones, any type of reading or whatever case may be, what they're actually doing, they're reading your field. They're reading your human biofield, bioetheric field, whatever you want to call it. Okay, karmic blueprint, patterns or imprints carried in the energy consciousness reflecting prior experience and informing current states. The internal, predetermined, yet potentially mutable data source reflected by the divination system, right? So that's the karmic blueprint. Synchronicity, the acausal connecting principle linking the internal psychological state to the external physical arrangement of the divination tool. The mechanism that ensures the resulting pattern, cards, hexagrams, lots, is meaningfully relevant to the querent's internal state. Synchronicity does this. Okay. The reflection principle, the dynamic process where internal psychological patterns are externalized, projected, or mirrored onto the environment, awaiting interpretation. So they're mirrored onto the environment. So this is when you this is just not limited to tarot cards and rune stones. See, that's what I was talking about on the previous video. The mind conforms to systems. So if I drop my keys, it means something. If I, if I'm driving in the car and something fly out of the glove compartment and hit me on the knee, that means something. You see what I'm saying? All of these things down to the most minutest detail, they all mean something or whatever case may be. Now you would have to almost have OCD to sit there and discern the meaning of every single thing that happens to you moment to moment. But at the same time, these are the same things I was referring to when I was talking about, let's say, like the language of situations, the language of happenings, that all of those type of things. Well, when you have a system in place, like the EFA system with the Odus and the I Ching system and stuff like with that, with the trigrams and stuff like that, those are well-defined systems and everything like that. So the same thing that you would get regardless that's being pushed through your nervous system or whatever case may be, now you have a ordered structured system, a way of kind of seeing what that input actually looks like or whatever in an acausal fashion. Boom, you roll your stones or whatever case may be, and boom, you see the orientation in which they fell, in which the nervous system pushed it out, in which the field pushed it out, and that coincidence, so-called, or whatever the case may be, that's going to be a readout. That's a reading of what your field looks like. Or I've had the experience of, let's say, like if I wanted to do a reading for someone else, and this is my personal experience. I don't know how everybody else does it, but if I wanted to read somebody else, I would just get a picture of them and think about them, focus my mind on them. And when I pull the cards, it would tell me something about them. You see what I'm saying? That type of thing. But moving right along, the acausal engine, Jungian synchronicity, and the collective unconscious, while the bioetheric feedback loop explains what information is being transferred, the blueprint, and how it is externalized, the reflection. Carl Jung's work on synchronicity and archetypes, primordial software, explains why the externalized information appears in a meaningfully recognized form. Okay, synchronicity as a causal connection, connecting principle. Synchronicity, defined by Jung as an acausal connecting principle, describes the simultaneous occurrence of events that are meaningfully related yet lack any discernible causal link. A plus B equals C. Okay, Jung, in collaboration with physicist Wolfgang Pauli, argued that just as causal connections explain the material world, acausal connections are necessary to provide a meaningful understanding of the psyche, of the mind. Okay, so you have to include acausal connections, these thematic associations with archetypes and these gross psychological thought forms or whatever, as opposed to, oh, it's a lighter, oh, it's a quartz crystal, oh, it's a cell phone. You see what I'm saying? Those are particulars. You see what I'm saying? A cell phone would qualify in the realm, let's say, like archetypically or thematically, let's say, like it will fall up under communication or something of that nature. It will be a much broader theme or whatever. Now, when it gets down to our level, it's distilled down into cell phone, beeper. If you want to be old school with it, yeah, car phone. Remember that? But anyway, um, archetypes and the collective unconsciousness as primordial software. Can you dig it? Okay, the concept of collective unconscious introduced by Jung is essential for translating acausal events into recognizable meaning. The collective unconscious is, take a look. Oh yeah, the collective unconscious is defined as a universal inherited reservoir of ideas, thoughts, patterns, and images known as archetypes. The collective unconscious is defined as a universal inherited reservoir. It's universal, it's inherited. We inherited, we born into this world. What Pop said, I was given this world, I didn't make it. You see what I'm saying? We inherited the collective human unconscious when we came into this, okay, of reservoir idea, thoughts, patterns, and images known as archetypes, right, that reside outside the personal consciousness of all human beings, right? Archetypes are the psychic equivalents of instincts. Archetypes are the psychic equivalents of instincts, manifesting across cultures in dreams, myths, behaviors, and religious symbolism. So all of the religious symbolisms or whatever case may be, they create archetypes, and those archetypes are not the end all be all. You see what I'm saying? Those archetypes represent principles, as we call them in the experiential, but those archetypes represent a certain quality of energy that comes from a particular blueprint, as we would say, or the source of the field, or whatever case may be, right? Remember when we talked about the Bardo states in death, the Bardo of Dharmata and everything like that? Once the field decouples from the battery or the capacitor, the human body, and it decomposes or whatever, it is exposed to the totality of the ether, as opposed to being dulled by the filter, which is the body or whatever. When it is exposed to the totality of the ether, according to Tibetan Buddhism, um, that's when you begin to see all your angels and grandmama and everybody, all the archetypes that exist in the mind or whatever the case may be. All of them come out and greet you because you're no longer constrained by the body. So primary archetypes structure the core human psyche. They structure the human psyche, including the self, representing the totality of an integration of the conscious and unconscious. So they're how we basically integrate the conscious and unconscious mind archetypes. The shadow, the repressed, undesirable, or rejected aspects of the personality. And we get into the shadow. That's what you're dealing with when you're dealing with addiction and stuff like that. That's what you're dealing with when you're dealing with, as we're going to get into it a little bit later when we talk about the various types of divination, modes of divination, or what have you. It talks about, it addresses some of the negative um, circumstances with people, let's say, like playing with Ouija boards and everything like that, because what you're doing, like how we talk about with the experiential and everything like that, and you have the divinatory practice within the experiential. It's called reflections. If you have 100 people in a room and you do a reflection, the theme that is overarching, let's say you and I have a conversation, the theme that's in the background of our conversation or what have you will apply to all 100 people in the room. It's a similar, because, and that's one of the concepts behind. You hear me on a couple of videos say there's only one thing. Well, a Ouija board works in a similar fashion or whatever case may be. You have a group of people operating with a Ouija board unless you're doing it by yourself, however it may go. And they'll collectively have their hand on the on the thing or whatever, on the compass, whatever the case may be. What you're doing, you're getting psychic residue from um, the fields of all those people are merged, and you're getting unconscious residue from all of those people or whatever case may be as a collective. So the shadow, if they have any unresolved shadow aspects of themselves, sometimes you can kind of unlock that or bring that out playing with the Ouija board. It's a collection of the fields of all the various people involved or what have you. And we'll get into that later on in the video. The shadow, the repressed, undesirable, or rejected aspects of the personality, right? All right. The anima, so those negative demons, so-called, or whatever that you run into when you play on the Ouija board, these are they mirror the shadow aspects of the self or whatever case may be. That's why you're even observing it in the first place. Okay, and the animus, the anima and animus, the contra sexual component, these archetypes function as primordial software, providing common, innate, symbolic language shared by the querent, the diviner, and the system itself. Without this shared structural language, an acausally generated event such as a specific pattern of coins or cards would hold no interpretable human meaning. So without the acausal thing is why the acausal circumstances, basically how I talk about, oh man, the ego has the full powers of the mind. We aspire to gain the full powers of the mind. This acausal thing that we're talking about, this ties into the powers of the mind. You see what I'm saying? Um, it's not a logical A plus B equals C type of deal. Um, Okay, let's see. Symbolic resonance, mimicry of the collective unconscious. Divination systems operate by formalizing and channeling this shared archetypal language. The symbols employed by these systems, whether the specific imagery of the tarot major arcana, the figures of the Ifa Odu, or the geometric patterns of the I Ching hexagrams, are deliberate, culturally recognized manifestations built upon these universal archetypes. For instance, symbols of the integrated self often involve universal patterns such as the circle, the mandala, or divine figures. The function of these formalized symbols is to provide a structured method for decoding the analog information transmitted by the bioetheric feedback loop. The bioetheric field or human biofield carries fluid, complex analog data corresponding to the karmic blueprint, right? So this is what you get from the field when you pull tarot cards or you do rune stones or something like that. Um, these symbols themselves act as cognitive interpreters, right? They draw the diffused informational content out of the chaotic field, right? They draw the so you shuffling the cards. That's emblematic. That's the uncertainty of the practice. You cutting the cards and everything like that, and doing everything you do with the cards or whatever case may be. That's emblematic of the uncertainty. And when you pulling a card or something like that, hypothetically, if you're using cards, whatever you're using, or whatever case may be, you're extracting some certainty out of the uncertainty. So-called, and collapse this infinite analog information into a finite, coherent narrative structure that is psychologically and culturally digestible. So you're basically muting the energy like Bishop from the X-Men. You're taking it from a thematic form and you're extracting a story from it. You see what I'm saying? A narrative from it. The efficacy of any divination system is therefore directly proportional to its ability to perfectly mimic the internal archetypal dynamics of the culture from which the querent originates. So just like how we said, um, when it comes to groups of people or whatever, they're collective fields. There are cultural identities. A symbol in one culture may mean something totally different in another culture based on the relationship that the people have with it or whatever case may be. So regardless of who you are or whatever case may be, where you come from, you belong to a community of people and stuff like that. And whether you would like to accept it or not, we're born into the collective unconscious. You see what I'm saying? We're born into the cultural identity of wherever we come from, whoever we are, whatever case may be. The process requires an acausal trigger, synchronicity, followed by an archetypal lens, the system's symbols to structure the information, the mechanism of discernment, information transfer in the reading. The successful discernment of information during a reading is a complex, multi-stage process involving energetic alignment, sympathetic resonance, and psychological translation. The role of the reader, intentionality, and minimizing uncertainty. Before the acausal event can take place, the environment must be optimized for the informational transfer. This requirement is reflected in the ceremonial or focused aspects of divination practice, such as praying, meditation, or clearing of the space. Clearing of the space, that's kind of similar to what we were talking about earlier in this impregnating space, something of that nature. But it's, that's a whole nother conversation. But if anybody's I know people I know of that I ran across that do readings, whether it be at botanicas and stuff like that. One of the better ones I ran across, RP to the to the elder Mama Everett. She was down here in Jacksonville, St. Anthony's Botanica and stuff like that. She used to do readings and everything like that. Um, and you could tell, um, she would use like natural implements and things of that nature. And from what I recall in her shop, herbs and things of that nature. But when you walk in, it's a clear energetic difference between the outside of the shop and when you walk in. It's just clear. That's all I can really. There's the signal is clear. That's the best way I can describe it, and I'm pretty sure other people kind of know what I'm talking about. Um, and it's all kind of explanations for that, but that's a whole nother conversation. From a bioetheric feedback loop perspective, this intentional focus serves to synchronize the subtle energy fields of the reader and the querent. Furthermore, it aligns with principles. Okay, synchronize the subtle energy fields of the reader and the querent. Remember when I said I would do readings for other people or whatever? I would think about that person or look at an image of that person to try to synchronize with that person or whatever. Furthermore, it aligns with principles observed in consciousness studies, where the goal is often the minimization of free energy or expected uncertainty within the brain system. The focus intentionally minimizes extraneous informational noise, like what we were talking about, like clearing the space, effectively creating a coherent, low uncertainty channel necessary for the acausal phenomenon synchronicity to manifest clearly. Okay, so it's a signal to noise ratio type thing or whatever, because you're trying to tap into a particular frequency, and we have all kind of extraneous noise. If you go back to the video Giants in the Earth in those days, we talk about the Holocene, the time period that we exist in on the planet or whatever, with the planet changed or what have you. It is a lot more energetically noisy. So entrainment and reading the karmatic blueprint, the physical act of reading, shuffling cards, holding a pendulum, or casting lots acts as the interface for the informational exchange. It's the interface for the informational exchange. Just like how what I was telling y'all about eating a bag of chips, that would be the interface for the informational exchange. But the only difference is there's no system to that. So so there's no way of getting the inherent information in that bag of Lay's potato chips. So when the reader and querent achieve focus resonance, their respective bioetheric fields, carriers of the karmic data, blueprint data, temporarily entrain. The physical the physical tool then becomes an informational conduit for the externalized bioetheric feedback loop. So the cards, the odus, whatever you got going on, the Corey shells, whatever, they become the physical informational conduit for the externalized bioetheric feedback loop. Okay. Same thing if your car break down. The same thing if you run into a situation with your next door neighbor. The same thing if you don't. Everything is a part of the feedback loop. But these things here are, as far as these specialized divinatory implements, they are more, they're designed specifically to read the feedback loop. You see what I'm saying? As opposed to random events like what I'm talking about. The theory suggests that the reader's ability to discern information transcends simple cold reading. Instead, it relies on sympathetic resonance hypothesis. A reader's own intrinsic analog DC electrical system processes a complex nonverbal pattern. The shadow content, the energetic blockages, the unmet needs reflected in the bioetheric field projected by the querent's bioetheric feedback loop. The reader is energetically attuned to the querent's energetic frequency. So basically, um, the stuff that's going on in this person's life, if the reader is attuned to this person's field, all the stuff that's going on in this person's life, all the stress that this person encounters or whatever, like we said on the previous video, go back into the video, we talk about the marma points and everything like that. Um, it's in the same series, The Electric Soul. It talks about how the trauma and stress in your life is changed into electrical signals and it's facilitated through your fascial networks, through these channels and stuff like that. And that's how you get blockages in your energy system, according to traditional Chinese medicine or whatever, because these meridian systems are located on junctions of the fascia. You see what I'm saying? And the fascia is piezoelectric. So when you encounter when your baby mama cuss you out, or you or you know what I'm saying, you have an issue with your job where you just had to tell such XYZ 1 2 3 or whatever, well that's stored electrically in your body. You see what I'm saying? And a person doing these readings or whatever, it's gonna come out in your field. Okay, so the psychological bridge, projection, and intuition. Once the acausal event has generated the symbolic pattern, e.g., the specific configuration of a hexagram or the drawing of a specific tarot card, a critical step of psychological transition begins. This is where the reader's intuition connects the universal archetype to the querent's unique life narrative or karmic blueprint. This is where the reader's intuition connects the universal archetype to the querent's unique life narrative or karmic blueprint. So basically, if you getting a person to do a tarot card reading for you, basically you borrowing his or her nervous system for a finite amount of time. Just like how I'm reading this to you. You see what I'm saying? How I'm putting in the little framework for the AI and I'm asking it questions or whatever case may be, and we sit here chopping it up. You know what I'm saying? You're effectively borrowing my nervous system for upwards of an hour. You feel me? So divination, divination systems that rely heavily on metaphor and complex symbols, such as tarot, offer a significant interpretive flexibility. This flexibility allows a reader to utilize conscious or unconscious psychological projection to map the external symbol back onto the querent's life. The core archetype, e.g., the hermit, representing introspection, or the shadow representing repressed elements, is universal, yet its specific meaning in the tarot is derived from the immediate bioetheric feedback loop data of the querent. So it's a universal meaning for those particular cards. In general, they're universal archetypes, but they can get more specific depending on what card. Let's say the hermit or something like that, what card it's next to, if it's upside down or right side up, just various different little nuances in the placement of the card could determine a different meaning or what have you, away from its more general meaning. Let's see, the reader therefore functions as a trained conscious filter, translating the primal language of the conscious unconscious into personal significance and accountable advice, because the primal language of the conscious, the collective unconscious, it's of a grosser nature. It's more thematic, it's more abstract, it's more archetypal, it's raw in its nature, or what have you. We live in a world of particulars and specifics, so it breaks down by the time it gets to us. Comparative analysis, acausal factors in divination modalities. Divination systems can be rigorously contrasted based on the mechanism by which they recognize and process the acausal factors, ranging from pure external chance, synchronicity, to internal muscular response, ideometer phenomenon. This contrast reveals critical differences in the reliability and informational source accessed by each modality. Systems of pure external acausality, objective chance selection. These modalities rely on a method of casting lights or chance selection, demanding that the querent's bioetheric feedback loop directly interact with the macro environment to manifest a physical, statistically random event. In these cases, the acausal factor is pure synchronicity. Let's read that again. These modalities rely on a method of casting lots, right? Um, casting lots. Basically, you could have a bunch of random objects. Some people create their own lots. You can have a bunch of random objects or what have you, and they each have a associated meaning with them or what have you. You could pick them one by one over a span of time and determine a meaning, or it could be a part of an existing system or what have you. So apparently random things or whatever, with the lots or what have you, and they still give you a divinatory meaning or what have you. So demanding that the querent's bioetheric feedback loop directly interact with the macro environment to manifest a physical, statistically random event. In these cases, the acausal factor is pure synchronicity. I would liken that to something like uh, I forget what it's called, but I forget what it's called, but it's dealing with the soot patterns on a candle, reading the soot patterns on a candle. That would tie more so into synchronicity, what they're talking about. You initiating a statistically random event, you burning a candle or whatever case may be, in certain patterns of soot on the candle are left behind or what have you, or whatever. That would be a causal in nature. Okay, so the I Ching is a foundational system that uses the casting of coins or the manipulation of yarrow stalks to generate one of the 64 hexagrams, forming a binary yes-no system repeated multiple times. The mechanism relies on on external chance, meaning the physical outcome. The resulting pattern of lines is statistically random, yet through synchronicity, it is rendered meaningfully connected to the querent's psychological state. Right? The hexagrams represent cosmic principles in temporal dynamics. Tau successfully translating the fluidity of the bioetheric feedback loop into structured temporal guidance. The I Ching maximizes external objectivity. The initial selection is minimally influenced by the querent's immediate bias, offering a clean reflection of the karmic blueprint. Through the interpretation required rigorous, lengthy study. Okay, the Odu system of the Ifa, okay, originating from West Africa, particularly the Yoruba tradition. The Ifa system uses similar casting mechanisms, typically involving 16 palm nuts or the Opele divination chain to generate one of the 256 Odu figures. I put this one in here because this the Odu system, though it's not talked about a lot. Um, it's comparable to the I Ching as far as mathematical precision. It's a well put together system. A lot of people talk about the I Ching system. I know Terrence McKenna, RIP. He did a whole thing on the I Ching or what have you. So a lot of people rant and rave on the I Ching system or whatever because it's precision and it's how it's set up. But the Odu system is very similarly very mathematically precise in a lot of ways. The acausal factor is pure external chance, and realistically, and that's from me being on the outside looking in. I don't practice this particular system, this particular EFA system, but I've observed people who do practice it, and I've kind of like glanced over a lot of the components of it or what have you, and it's quite interesting. The acausal factor is pure external chance, analogous to the I Ching. Each Odu figure corresponds to an elaborate mythical narrative that maps out specific destiny, existential problems, or path of resolution. This system draws deeply on Yoruba archetypal knowledge, acting as a highly specific cultural filter for the universal collective unconscious, right? Okay, so augury. Augury is augury is interesting. Augury encompassing this ties into this is similar to I don't know, reminds me of the language of situations, how we talk about it. Augury encompassing practices such as interpreting the flight patterns of birds or signs derived from entrails, like how they would slaughter a pig or something like that, pull out his entrails, and however they fall or whatever case may be, it determines certain certain events that will shortly come to pass. If I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on this, but if I'm not mistaken, I think in Julius Caesar's situation or whatever, when he was going to be assassinated, I think that's how they arrived at the whole thing. Beware the Ides of March. It was some sort of divination of a similar nature that they did like this, if I'm not mistaken. Involved observed synchronicity. Unlike systems where the querent manipulates a tool, augury requires a diviner to select a pre-existing, non-manipulated external phenomenon as a meaningful context. Similar to the way this is painted, augury, similar to like how we were talking about the car breaking down, or um, uh, a ketchup bottle hitting you while you driving or something like that. This would be augury, interpretation of natural events, what Brother Asar been talking about for a couple years now. The bioetheric feedback loop is thus seen as linking the querent's internal state directly to the macro environmental archetype. So basically, augury is basically what Brother Asar been talking about when he says think with your environment, something of that nature. Your environment, the seemingly isolated events that happen in your environment have an interpretable meaning according to what this is talking about, and it's a part of the larger feedback loop, like how what we've been talking about for years at this point. So utilizing natural occurrences as the reflective mirror, utilizing natural occurrences, natural phenomena as the reflective mirror, systems of mixed and causality and projective symbolism. These systems employ a chance event to initiate the reading, but the mechanism of discernment relies heavily on the subsequent psychological projection onto rich metaphorical symbols, tarot cards, and rune stones. In both tarot and rune casting, the initial selection process shuffles, and drawing cards for casting runes is a chaotic acausal event reflecting synchronicity. This acausal trigger opens up the informational channel. However, the subsequent interpretive phase is heavily reliant on the reader's intuition and projection onto the complex, culturally resonant images or symbols, right? The tarot major arcana, for example, are explicit visual representations of Jungian archetypes. That's why I like on the self shrine. Um, I'm not trying to instruct you in how to use tarot cards to do magic or nothing like that. I mean, True Master, the book True Master, it has nothing to do with the usage of tarot cards. Um, what I talk about in True Master, I use tarot cards to um, give an example of things that operate within this same feedback loop. You see what I'm saying? That use the idea of symbols, patterns, and principles, and that use the concept of archetypes. So if you ever see me use tarot cards or something in the context of True Master, I will use tarot cards for their convenience of depictions of archetypes. You see what I'm saying? But reading tarot cards is something totally different. I don't have any. Uh, personally, I'm familiar with how to read tarot cards, but I don't. That's not a part of the material of the True Master. So, um, while runes draw on primordial linguistic and cosmological structures, these systems serve as archetypal filters, translating the diffuse bioetheric feedback loop data into a conscious narrative structure, facilitating the integration of subconscious conflicts, the shadow, into conscious awareness. The informational discernment is achieved through the coupling of an acausal trigger with an archetypal lens. Okay, so that's the hybrid form of it. Okay, systems dominated by ideomotor feedback, internal acausality, right? A vital contrast exists in modalities that do not rely on external randomization, but rather on the kinetic output of the participant's own nervous system, right? So right now we're going to talk about pendulums and Ouija boards. That's basically what it's talking about. It's talking about something that's not, you don't cast it or nothing like that. It's when you cast it, it's still relying on your nervous system, but this is more directly guided by the nervous system. You know, Ouija boards like that. Okay, so um, this system, let's see, functions through the physical movement of a tool, the pendulum's swing, or the planchette movement across the board, the mechanism responsible for the ideal motor phenomenon. A psychological process where a subject's thoughts, emotions, or mental images bring about subtle involuntary muscular reactions, often outside of conscious awareness. The critical distinction is that these systems are not reflections of external synchronicity. The acausal factor here is the internal unconscious driver of kinetic output. The IMR reflects, hold on one second, y'all. I'll put a charger on this. Been kind of ride for a minute, so this charger right here. All right, keep the party going. All right, there we go. Keep the party going, pimp. All right, so okay, so the critical distinction. Okay, so these systems function through the physical movement of a tool, the pendulum swing, or the planchette's movement across the board. Planchette is the thing that you use when you're dealing with a Ouija board. The mechanism responsible for an ideomotor phenomenon. That's IMR, a psychological process where a subject's thoughts, emotions, or mental images bring about subtle involuntary muscle reactions, often outside of conscious awareness. The critical distinction is that these systems are not reflections of external chance synchronicity. The acausal factor here is the internal unconscious driver of kinetic input. It's guided by your nervous system the whole time. It's not just a one cast out. Um, the IMR reflects the bioetheric feedback loop data directly through the neurological and muscular systems, right? We've already talked about that on previous videos. The discerned information is the unconscious thought, repressed content, or emotional charge already present within the querent's karmic blueprint, which is then mechanically magnified by the tool. The tool is an amplification, right, of what's already in your nervous system or what's already lurking in your field. For the Ouija board, right? The ideomotor phenomenon is often a collective, shared kinetic output reflecting merged psychological states among all participants. So if you got 5 unhinged people and they doing, they're working with the Ouija board or whatever case may be, if they have a lot of shadow material, you may get some less than favorable things that may be conjured up. This merging of subconscious inputs increases the risk of accessing fragmented or collective shadow material, like what we just said, as the output reflects the least integrated, most emotionally charged ideations present in the collective bioetheric feedback loops of the group. Let's see here. Goes into all that. Let's see some of the implications, the spectrum of acausality and reliability. The analysis demonstrates that divination modalities fall along a spectrum determined by the nature of their acausal mechanism. Symptoms of external acausality, such as the I Ching and Ifa, employ maximally chaotic, statistically random uncertainty, like how we talked about before, processes to select a symbol, minimizing the reader's or querent's immediate psychological bias. Their efficacy relies almost entirely on synchronicity, making the random event meaningful. So synchronicity is the underlying thing that makes that stuff work. In contrast, the systems relying on idea motor, Ouija boards, pendulums, reflect the bioetheric feedback loop data directly through the neuromuscular system, resulting in information that is highly charged with immediate subconscious and emotional content. This approach risks significant subjective contamination as output is driven by the very psychological patterns or neural noise that the reading seeks to analyze. For reliable informational retrieval, the most robust form of divination requires both maximum energetic focus, bioetheric feedback loop alignment during the preparatory phase. So basically establishing a level of coherence. That's why some rituals, if you read certain rituals in the Middle Ages and stuff like that, they have these long periods of time where they're preparing for the ritual before they even do any type of work with the feedback loop. And rigorous intellectual detachment during the interpretive phase to prevent the reader's own psychological bias from distorting the meaning of the objectively selected symbol. Yeah, that's a thing. Ethical and therapeutic implications of bioetheric feedback loop. The bioetheric feedback loop framework provides robust justification for divination as a sophisticated diagnostic tool. A sophisticated diagnostic tool, right? Not pseudo, because pseudo in Einstein's physics. You see what I'm saying? When we get to Tesla's physics, this is an exercise of in consciousness. This it's an actual thing. You see what I'm saying? By viewing the bioetheric feedback loop as an energetic repository of the karmic blueprint, divinatory practices become capable of identifying complex psychological patterns and energetic blockages, such as the chakra leakage observed in profound distress. Often long before these issues manifest fully on a physical or conscious level, the therapeutic unity of a divination utility of a divination is rooted in the reflection principle. The mere act of obtaining a reading externalizes previously unresolved internal conflicts, elements of the shadow, from the unconscious bioetheric feedback loop and places them into conscious symbolic form. Right. So basically, when you're doing a divination or whatever, you're taking repressed material that might be in its rawer thematic form, and you're able to distill it down and get it closer to our form or whatever, so we can kind of see what the problem is. Okay, this recognition is a fundamental initial step towards psychological healing and is essential for recovery pathways, as noted in Jungian analysis of addiction. Divination provides a narrative map necessary for the process of individuation, coming into yourself, the lifelong journey of integrating all aspects of the psyche into a unified self, right? Furthermore, the model reframes the energetic predetermination. Destiny is not seen as absolute, immutable decree, but rather a high probability trajectory. So free will does exist, but there's a high probability trajectory for you see what I'm saying, when there are pre-existing acausal conditions that sway your free will in one direction or another. You just don't have absolute free will to do what you want to do. There are governors and constraints and preferences put on your free will or whatever, acausally. By revealing this pattern, divination furnishes the conscious will, the individual's capacity for free determination, with necessary information to deliberately alter the energetic trajectory, enabling meaningful change in the underlying patterns that inform reality. All right. So in conclusion, bioetheric feedback loop and reflection principle framework serve as a necessary conceptual bridge linking esoteric practices with empirical consciousness research. Amen. By grounding the spiritual concept of the karmic blueprint within the measurable phenomenon of bioelectricalism. Okay. And validating the commutative link through the psychological objective of archetypes and synchronicity. This framework formalizes divination as a structured process of analog information retrieval, from the body's electrical network. Right? It's not pseudo. If you think divination is pseudo, then your understanding of many other nuances of this conversation might be pseudo. So, channeled and validated by non-causal principles, the unification suggests that further research into the analog DC system and its correlation with external symbolic randomization may lead to scientific operationalization of divination. Operationalization of divination, right? So yeah, So yeah, that's pretty much what we had today. Just kind of going into divination and kind of expressing how for divination to really even make sense, if we want to really explain it and understand why it works, we have to include the idea that the body is electrical. All right. And you have to include the idea that this is some kind of feedback loop from some, you see what I'm saying? It just makes more sense with this being some sort of feedback loop. And the divinatory methods or tools are specialized tools designed for dealing with that specifically. This happens regardless as far as you existing. Um, the self is going to push messages out. The blueprint is going to push messages out, you see what I'm saying? Through you getting sick, through you meeting people, through you going through all these random situations in your life or whatever case may be. So you can either eyeball them like how what we've been talking about with the experiential in the sense of like how we talked about here, augury, you know what I'm saying? Eyeballing random phenomena, filtering them through a thematic framework to understand the meaning, or you can use divinatory implements like tarot cards, rune stones, and things of that nature that were specifically designed in systems for things of that nature. So I thought that was an interesting piece, kind of going in with what we talked about on the video about the purpose of ritual sacrifice to adjust the blueprint. You see what I'm saying? So these are some interesting pieces to kind of flesh out um, why ancient people did a lot of the things that they were doing. What were the energetic implications for what they were trying to do? And as we can see, they weren't just some dumb religious minded people or whatever case may be. This was more of a technology than just some kind of mindless religious type situation or whatever. So if y'all like what y'all been hearing, like, subscribe. Appreciate you for checking me out, riding with me. Hey, peace and blessings. Catch y'all on the next one. Peace.